Hi, today we're going to go over 10 tips to become a one salary home successfully. In our case, my wife is the one that works and she's a public school teacher, so her salary is not massive, but we are able to make it work. We have everything that we need and we're still able to get a few wants as well. So I'm going to break this video up into 5 pre-work tips and then 5 tips to make it work once you're down to one salary. Pre-work tips, obviously the earlier you do it the better. In our case, we didn't know we were going to be a one salary home, so we did these pre-work tips as quickly as we could once we realized that was where we were going to end up. But the earlier you do them the better. And then the 5 tips are just 5 things that we do either day to day or generally keep in our mind to make this work as best as possible. So without further ado, let's jump into tip number 1. Pre-work tip number 1, figure out where your money goes. And by that I essentially just mean build a really solid budget. I'm not going to go through how to do it step by step. There are a ton of tutorials on YouTube. There's free apps you can use, Google resources. Also, you can just write everything down and add it up, whatever works for you. But you want to be really honest here. Exactly how much are you spending every month? So a good way to do this is to look back at credit card statements, debit card statements, save receipts for a month, and add up all of those expenses. Even if it's something that you don't think you're going to pay every month, it's a good idea to have that because things come up. But you do want to be honest. Don't forget debt. Don't forget little recurring payments. Like maybe you have your Netflix payment as a recurring payment. That's still money you're paying every month. Add up all of those expenses and get a good idea of how much money you're paying out for various reasons each and every month. Pre-work tip number 2 is that one monthly salary enough to cover all of those monthly expenses. If it's not, don't panic, but be very honest again. Don't forget to take into account taxes and benefits. In our case, I had always covered benefits and my wife was going to have to start doing that out of her salary. So before we compared our expenses to her salary, we figured out what the benefits would cost, deducted it from her monthly paycheck, and then compared. Honesty is going to be key in all of this because you're only going to hurt yourself down the road if you're not honest. But that's step number 2. Take the expenses you added up and compare them to the one paycheck you would like to live on. Pre-work step number 3 is where can you cut back? This is a critical step to take if your salary does not cover your expenses, but it's a good habit to get into anyway. And what you're going to want to do here is that list of expenses you wrote out, consider it very carefully, and is there anything that isn't critical to your family? What can you cut out that you don't need? If your salary does cover your expenses, you don't have to go crazy here. So for instance, for us, we've never had cable, but we had Hulu and Netflix. We really only watch Netflix, so we cut out Hulu. Now, if our salary didn't cover our expenses, I might consider cutting out both. It's just something to keep in mind. And something else that we've considered is switching cell phone providers. Yeah. And also maybe becoming a one-car family. Right now, for us, that isn't worth it, but it is something that we're considering because one of our cars is fully paid off and one we're still doing payments for. So if we cut the car that we were doing payments for, that would save us a considerable amount each month. That said, even those small savings add up. For instance, my wife used to like to stop on her drive to work to get a coffee. It's anywhere from, $3 to $5, and she would do it 2 or 3 times a week. So that's anywhere from, $6 to $15 weekly. Added up over the course of the year, it's a decent amount of savings. And the more places like that you can cut back, the more money you're adding into your available money to put towards other things that you need. Pre-work tip number 4 is start saving now. If you have some time before you're going to move to one salary, take any available extra money you have and put it into savings. This can become an emergency fund. For instance, for us, in December, we had a fuel pump quit working, and that was a $1,200 repair. Having some money in savings was really helpful in paying for that. The other part of this is start paying down debt if you have time. Because when you come to one salary, if you've paid down that debt, the less you owe, the better. It all goes towards boosting that income or at least the reach of the one salary you're living on. Pre-work tip number 5 is start getting used to talking about money. This is a good habit for couples to get into, in my opinion, even if you're not going to go to a one salary house, but it's that much more critical if you are. For Lauda and I, when we were a 2-income home, we didn't really worry about talking about small purchases. For instance, if I was going to work and wanted a breakfast sandwich, I would stop and get it, didn't feel the need to tell her. However, now, if we're both doing that all the time, we could very easily end up in a bad situation because those little purchases, as I said, add up quickly. So our current rule of thumb is we obviously talk about our finances monthly, and we know what bills we're paying. We also know what things we have to buy and what our rough budget is. So if we're buying something that we need, so for her, gas, groceries for me, or if either of us is paying bills, we go ahead and do those things without telling the other person. But if it's a want, we text the other person first. An example is if Ani and I are out doing some errands and I really want a Diet Coke, I'll text Lauda, hey, I'm going to buy a Diet Coke. And it's funny how often just texting her that helps me understand how little I need that. And sometimes before she even replies, I've texted her, never mind, I've changed my mind. You don't have to be that extreme about it, but you both want to be open and honest about where the money is going so you don't end up in a situation where you're each spending money that you think the other one is not spending. So communicate about your finances, and the earlier you start doing that, the better. And that is a wrap on breakfast. It is also a wrap on our pre-work tips. So let's move into tips to get by on one salary. Here we go. Tip 6 is build a budget and stick to it. This is particularly helpful when you come to your expenses. The biggest areas that we tend to slip up on are groceries. So I have a really strict grocery budget for us. We don't exceed $60 a week on groceries. That also includes all of our like shampoo, conditioner, household cleaners, diapers, wipes, pretty much anything we need for the house I include in the grocery budget. So while we can't exceed 60, I try to stick to about 30 most weeks. That works really well for keeping us on track. So figure out what works for you, especially within your given salary, and stick to it. Again, hold each other accountable. Tip number 7 is be thrifty, be frugal, be cheap, whatever you want to call it. An example for us recently is we knew that Lauda needed some new work pants. She and I both needed new jeans, and this cheeky monkey needed a bigger size of clothes. Our first stop was a thrift store. We found everything we needed plus some for only $40, and Lauda's one pair of work pants alone probably would have cost us $40 at a retail store or the mall. So consider cheaper ways to get things. Shop around, that's something else. If you don't want to go the thrift store route, see who's having sales. Are there coupons you can use? Just try to think of a creative way to spend a little bit less money on the things that you do need. Tip number 8 is reward apps or credit cards. And with both of these, you want to be careful to only spend money you are going to spend anyway. So the two apps that we use are Ibotta and Fetch, and the way that we do them is I build a list, and then I check to see if any of those items are on either of the apps. If they are, great, I'm going to get a rebate that week. If they're not, then I don't scroll through and find what other things I might want, because that's just going to end in me spending money I wasn't planning on spending. With Ibotta, you can directly get the cash back. However, we do Amazon gift cards with Ibotta and Fetch because there's always things that we need to order on Amazon, and it's just easier. With reward credit cards, again, you want to be careful not to overuse them because you're obviously going to have to pay that money back at a high interest rate if you aren't paying it off every month. If you have to carry a balance, I guess that's up to you and your family, but I recommend paying them off monthly when at all possible. You don't want to have to pay that interest. Tip number 9 is to find a side hustle. For us, that is selling things on eBay, both things we have at the house and don't need anymore, and things that we get at thrift stores for good prices. My wife makes and sells things on Etsy and Facebook Marketplace. Tutoring, and previously I've done some contract work for the agency I used to work for. With all of these, you just want to make sure that whatever you're spending to get the goods or the materials will leave you room to still make a profit once you've sold them. Covered fees from the websites, so eBay charges a fee, so does PayPal, and also paid for shipping. On top of that, you're going to want to take into consideration taxes. I'm not going to go too in-depth with this because I'm not an accountant and I don't want to give you any bad tax information, but you will have to pay taxes on this money, so take that into account and set aside whatever that amount is in a savings account so you don't have to stress about it when tax time comes around. But side hustles can be great to either cover expenses you have or to have some free money or to just boost up your emergency savings account. And last, but certainly not least, tip 10 is find a way to have some fun with this. Whether that's movie nights at home where you go to the library and rent a DVD you haven't seen and all cuddle up on the couch and watch that, or day trips to the park where you take a picnic, or try to do something like us where you take some Christmas money and buy annual zoo passes, and when we go, we're just careful not to buy any souvenirs or snacks. find a way to have some fun because you're not in the one income game to be miserable and feel like you're missing out constantly. So that sums up our 10 tips for surviving and thriving, really, on one income, and in our case, so I can be a stay-at-home mom. Hopefully you found something helpful. Bye!